All right, everyone, get ready, because today we're diving into one of the most debated alien encounters ever.
Yeah, debated is right.
The Pascagoula Abduction.
It's been 50 years
50 years.
since that night in 1973.
1973, crazy to think about, and yet this story still has people arguing.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got it all.
Oh, we've got news articles, witness accounts.
We even have a rare interview with Calvin Parker himself.
Before he passed away just last year.
So what we're going to do is unpack all of this, see how this event shaped the way we think about UFOs.
How it fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah, and maybe even try to figure out why it still fascinates us all these years later.
Why it stuck around so long.
So to kick things off, what is it about this case that you find so interesting?
I think one of the things that makes this case so compelling is that it really throws into question the very idea of proof.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, we have multiple witnesses, we have physical evidence in the form of that secret recording,
Right.
and yet people are still arguing about it 50 years later.
Okay, so let's set the scene for everyone listening.
Okay.
It's October 11th, 1973,
1973.
on the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi.
Down south.
Two guys, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. They're just out fishing.
Enjoying a quiet evening.
Right, just a normal night out. And then everything changes.
Everything changes.
So they claim they saw a blue light.
The blue light, some kind of craft.
Some kind of craft.
And then, get this, three creatures
Richard.
that took them aboard.
Wait, hold on. So it wasn't just like a quick sighting?
Yeah.
They said they were actually abducted.
That's what they reported, yep.
Wow.
And to really understand the impact of this, you have to consider the context.
Okay, so what was going on back then?
This was 1973.
Like we said.
The height of the Cold War and public interest in UFOs was really starting to take off.
Right, it was becoming more mainstream.
Absolutely.
And this wasn't some blurry photo of a light in the sky.
No.
These were two average guys claiming they had been physically taken. That had to have sent shockwaves through the community.
Absolutely. The story spread like wildfire.
Yeah, I bet.
National news, international coverage, everyone was talking about these two guys from Mississippi.
Okay, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
let's go back to that night.
Back to the beginning.
Hickson and Parker, they went straight to the police, right?
They did. Yep, straight to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department.
And what's incredible is that their initial conversation with the officers
Yeah.
was secretly recorded.
Secretly recorded.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah,
So we have them on tape describing what happened right after it allegedly occurred.
we do. It's an amazing piece of evidence.
So the police were secretly recording them.
They were.
Were they suspicious from the beginning?
Well, the officers, Sheriff Fred Diamond and Captain Glenn Ryder, they were definitely skeptical at first.
I mean, who wouldn't be?
Exactly. But something about the genuine terror in the men's voices, particularly in that recording,
Yeah.
made them think twice.
I've read about this recording. And there's that part
Yeah.
where Parker whispers,
Mm-hmm.
"They'll come back and get us."
Chilling.
It really gives you chills, even reading it on paper.
Oh, yeah.
It's haunting.
It is. And it apparently convinced Captain Ryder.
So he believed them.
He later said, they didn't make it up. I can guarantee that.
Wow. But even if they sounded genuinely scared,
Yeah.
couldn't they have just made up the story? Was there anything else to back up their claims?
Well, that's where it gets interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Hickson and Parker agreed to take polygraph tests.
Lie detector test.
Yep, which they reportedly passed.
Wow.
And this was at a time when polygraphs were considered much more reliable than they are today.
Right.
So that adds another layer.
So we have a secret recording of them sounding terrified.
Uh,
They passed lie detector tests.
yep.
It's starting to feel like there might be something to this.
It does, doesn't it?
And here's where it gets even more complex. Years later, after Parker published his book in 2018, other people came forward,
Really?
claiming they saw something unusual that night.
So there are corroborating witnesses.
There are, yeah.
Wow.
Maria Blair, who was on the other side of the river,
Across the river.
said she saw a strange blue light in the sky.
That matches up with what Hickson and Parker described.
It does.
But hold on, if other people saw this blue light,
Yeah,
wouldn't there have been more reports at the time?
that's a good question.
Why did these witnesses wait so long to come forward?
Yeah, why?
Well, it's possible that the initial media frenzy and skepticism surrounding the case made people hesitant to come forward.
Yeah, you don't want to be labeled as crazy.
Right, and remember, this was a small town.
People talk.
They talk, and they might not want to draw that kind of attention to themselves.
That's true.
But then you have other witnesses,
Okay.
like Rebecca Davis and Grant Fair,
Okay.
who spoke about the lasting impact.
Impact on them.
Yeah, the impact the Pascagoula abduction had on their community.
Okay, but before we dive into the impact,
Okay.
let's hear what Hickson himself had to say about that night.
Absolutely. Let's listen to a clip from a YouTube interview
Oh, perfect.
where he describes the experience in his own words.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay.
Wow. I mean, you can hear the emotion in his voice,
You can.
even all these years
All
later.
these years later.
It's hard to dismiss that as just a fabrication.
It's incredibly compelling, and this is where we have to address the elephant in the room.
Okay, what's that?
The skepticism.
Right, because for every person who believes Hickson and Parker, there's someone who thinks they made the whole thing up.
Absolutely. That's just the nature of these kinds of stories.
Right, it seems like with UFO stories, there's
Yeah.
always that push and pull between belief and skepticism.
Exactly, and that's healthy.
You think so?
I do. We should always approach these topics with a critical eye.
I can get behind that.
One of the most well-known skeptics who investigated the Pascagoula abduction was Philip G. Klass.
So even with the recording, the polygraph tests, and these other witnesses,
Yeah.
there were still people who thought it was a hoax.
There were, and Klass was one of the most vocal.
Interesting.
He pointed out inconsistencies in Hickson's account and questioned the reliability of the polygraph results.
So even the evidence that seemed to support Hickson and Parker was being challenged.
It was.
And what about Parker?
Yeah.
Did he face the same level of scrutiny?
Well, Parker actually remained largely silent for decades.
Really?
He didn't publish his own account of the events until 2018.
Wow.
Which of course fueled even more speculation.
So two men linked by this bizarre experience,
Yeah,
but choosing to handle it in completely different ways.
completely different.
That adds another layer of intrigue to the whole story.
It does, and it raises an interesting question.
Okay, what's that?
Why would they react so differently?
I don't know.
Was it age, personality, maybe even their individual beliefs about UFOs before the alleged encounter?
Those are really good questions.
It makes you think.
It seems like the human element of this story
Yeah,
is just as fascinating as the potential extraterrestrial one.
absolutely, and we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, we're just getting started.
We still haven't even touched on the impact this event had on pop culture and the UFO community as a whole.
All right, well, let's get into that then, because I'm dying to know how a story like this
Yeah,
from a small town in Mississippi went on to capture the world's imagination.
it's wild, right? Well, to really get it, you have to remember this was 1973.
Right.
The Watergate scandal was unfolding.
Oh, yeah.
The Vietnam War was winding down, and there was this growing distrust of authority. People were looking for answers, you know.
For something bigger than themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, in a way, the timing was perfect for a story like this to capture the public's attention.
Right, it fed right into that feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Pascagoula abduction, it tapped into this zeitgeist.
This fascination with the unknown.
Right, and it quickly became this pop culture phenomenon.
Okay, but what does that actually look like? How did this one event actually infiltrate pop culture?
Well, for one, the media coverage was insane.
Oh, I bet.
Hickson and Parker were on every major news outlet,
Really?
from local newspapers to national television.
Wow.
They were even on the game show, to tell the truth.
Like, on a game show?
Can you imagine that?
That's wild.
So, yeah, they were really thrust into the spotlight.
Because...
And they handled it in very different ways, remember?
Right.
Hickson, he seemed to embrace the attention,
Okay.
giving interviews, writing a book.
Putting himself out there.
Yeah, but Parker, on the other hand, he retreated from the public eye.
Went the opposite direction.
Completely, dealing with the trauma and the scrutiny in his own way.
It's almost like the event created two parallel narratives.
Yeah.
Not just about what happened that night,
Right.
but about how these two men processed this incredibly strange and frightening experience.
It's true. It's a fascinating psychological aspect of this whole story.
And it's not just about Hickson and Parker, is it?
It's not, no.
You said it influenced movies and books and music too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Pascagoula abduction had a ripple effect.
Okay, so give me some examples.
Sure.
What kind of cultural impact are we talking about here?
Well, think about movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Oh yeah, classic.
which came out just a few years later.
Right.
The image of average people encountering alien beings, that sense of awe and terror,
Uh-huh.
it's very much in line with the Pascagoula abduction narrative.
I can see that, yeah.
And it wasn't just movies.
You said books and music too.
Yeah, there was a wave of science fiction literature that explored themes of alien abduction and government cover-ups. And even in music, you had bands like the Pixies referencing the Pascagoula abduction in their songs.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It became this touchstone, this cultural shorthand for the unexplainable.
So this one event from
Yeah.
this small town in Mississippi became this global phenomenon,
Exactly.
influencing art, entertainment, and even shaping the way we think about the possibility of extraterrestrial life.
Precisely. And it's not just about pop culture either.
Okay, so where else did it have an impact?
The Pascagoula abduction, it played a significant role in shaping the field of ufology itself.
Okay, so we're moving beyond just entertainment now
We are.
and into the realm of serious UFO research.
Exactly, because remember, this was a time when the government was actively downplaying the possibility of UFOs.
Right, we talk about Project Blue Book.
Yeah, Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation, had just been shut down a few years earlier.
So back then, if you reported seeing a UFO, you were basically labeled a cook, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And that makes the Pascagoula abduction even more interesting.
It does.
You have these two seemingly credible witnesses
Yeah.
passing lie detector tests, a secret recording of their terror.
Right.
It challenged the official narrative.
In a way that few other cases did.
And now, fast forward to today.
Okay.
The government is being much more open about UAPs.
About UAPs.
Yeah.
The unidentified aerial phenomena.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
a big change.
We're hearing about congressional hearings,
Whistleblower testimony.
even talk of recovered alien technology.
It's mind-blowing.
It's a complete 180 from the era of the Pascagoula abduction.
It really is, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
About what?
Does this newfound openness, does it lend more credibility to cases like this one?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
If the government was covering up evidence of UFOs back then, maybe a case like the Pascagoula abduction, which was met with so much official skepticism, deserves a second look.
Maybe. It's certainly possible.
If we're to believe that there's been this decades-long cover-up,
Right.
then cases like this one might be just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
couldn't you argue that this increased government transparency
Okay.
might actually make people more likely to believe in UFO stories?
I see what you're saying.
Even without strong evidence.
That's a valid point. We have to be careful not to fall into the trap of confirmation bias.
Right.
Just because there's more official talk about UAPs.
Doesn't mean every UFO sighting is suddenly evidence of aliens.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate this new landscape? How do we separate genuine curiosity from unfounded speculation?
I think it comes down to critical thinking.
Okay.
We can't just accept everything we hear at face value. We have to scrutinize the evidence, consider the different perspectives, and be willing to admit when we just don't know.
And that's true for any topic, really.
It is.
But especially when it comes to something as complex and mysterious as UFOs.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the Pascagoula abduction such a fascinating case study.
I agree.
It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and to acknowledge that there might be things in this universe that defy our current understanding.
It's humbling, in a way.
It is.
Yeah, it's like we always say. We're not afraid of the dark, we're afraid of what's in it.
Right.
And maybe these UFO stories, these encounters with the unknown,
Yeah.
they tap into that primal fear. You know what I mean?
That's a great point. It's the fear of the unseen, the unexplainable,
Yeah.
and the Pascagoula abduction. It really plays on that fear perfectly.
All right, so we've talked about the evidence, the skepticism, the cultural impact.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle I want to explore.
Okay.
The historical context.
Right.
This event happened 50 years ago.
A long time ago.
How has our understanding of UFOs changed since then?
That's a really important question because the Pascagoula abduction didn't occur in a vacuum.
Okay.
It happened at a time when the government was actively trying to debunk and dismiss UFO sightings.
Right. We talked about Project Blue Book shutting down just a few years earlier.
Exactly.
So back then, if you reported seeing a UFO, you were basically labeled a cook, right?
Pretty much.
And that makes the Pascagoula abduction even more interesting, wouldn't you say?
I would, yeah.
Here you have these two seemingly credible witnesses
Yeah.
passing lie detector tests.
Right.
A secret recording of their terror.
It's compelling stuff.
It challenged the official narrative in a way that few other cases did.
I think you're right.
And now, fast forward to today,
Okay.
the government is being much more open
Much more open.
about UAPs.
About UAPs, yeah. Unidentified aerial phenomena.
We're hearing about congressional hearings, whistleblower testimonies.
Even talk of recovered alien technology.
It's wild.
It is. It's a complete 180 from the era of the Pascagoula abduction.
And it makes you wonder, does this newfound openness lend more credibility to cases like this one?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
It's tough to say for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if the government was covering up evidence of UFOs back then, maybe a case like the Pascagoula abduction, which was met with so much official skepticism,
Yeah.
deserves a second look.
It's possible, yeah. If we're to believe that there's been this decades-long cover-up, then cases like this one might be just the tip of the iceberg.
But on the other hand, couldn't you argue that this increased government transparency
Yeah.
might actually make people more likely to believe in UFO stories, even without strong evidence?
That's true. You bring up a good point. We have to be careful not to fall into the trap of confirmation bias.
Right, just because there's more official talk about UAPs
Yeah.
doesn't mean every UFO sighting is suddenly evidence of alien visitation.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate this new landscape?
I know, it's tricky.
How do we separate genuine curiosity from just unfounded speculation?
Well, I think it comes down to critical thinking. We can't just accept everything we hear at face value.
Right.
We have to really scrutinize the evidence, consider the different perspectives.
And be willing to admit when we just don't know.
Exactly.
And that's true for any topic,
Oh, absolutely.
but especially when it comes to something as complex and mysterious as UFOs.
For sure. And I think that's what makes the Pascagoula abduction such a fascinating case study.
Yeah, it really is.
It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge and to acknowledge that there might be things in this universe that just defy our current understanding.
It's humbling.
It is, really is.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Pascagoula abduction.
Wow, time flies.
It really does.
That was a wild ride.
It was. I hope you've all enjoyed it.
Me too.
I hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of this complex and controversial event.
And maybe some new questions to ponder.
And maybe even a renewed sense of wonder about the mysteries that still surround us.
That's what it's all about.
Until next time, happy diving, everyone.
Keep searching.